I will never forget the sound of that laugh. It was a dry, cutting laugh, the kind that doesn't come from joy but from cruelty disguised as amusement. It echoed through the Italian marble hall like part of the soundtrack of a psychological thriller, and maybe it was, because what I was about to witness that autumn night in Sao Paulo would forever change the way I see the world. Let me start from the beginning. The girl was no more than 12, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. Hunger has a way of erasing age from a child's face, of making their eyes look older than they should. She stood by the side entrance of the Municipal Theater, that imposing building that has seen more history and talent than most of us will ever witness in 10 lifetimes. Her dress, if we can even call it a dress, was a patchwork of brown fabric and stains, telling stories no one wanted to hear. But it wasn't the clothes that caught my attention. It was the violin. A battered violin, its varnish peeling, strings hanging on seemingly by sheer willpower. She held that instrument like someone holds the last remaining piece of someone they love, and in her eyes, there was something, a mix of fear and determination I had never seen in a child before. I was there to cover a charity event. Yes, one of those events where millionaires show up to take pictures and feel human for a few hours. The kind of event where a single glass of champagne costs more than a waiter's monthly salary. My job was to write stories about rich people doing good deeds, but that night I witnessed something far bigger. That's when he appeared. Eduardo Almeida Vasconcelos. The name says it all, doesn't it? 3 last names, an estimated fortune of 800 million, owner of one of the largest construction companies in the country, in his early 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than a compact car, a Swiss watch that caught the light even in the shadows, perfectly combed gray hair, upright posture, and that look of someone who has never had to ask for anything because the world has always given it willingly. He was accompanied by 3 other businessmen when the girl approached, and that's when it happened. "Sir." Her voice was so soft it almost got lost in the noise of people entering the theater. "Sir, could you give me something to eat?" Eduardo stopped. The other men stopped too. For a second there was a strange silence, as if the universe was holding its breath. "I play the violin," she continued, lifting the instrument with trembling hands. "I can play for a piece of food." That's when the laughter began. It didn't start loud. It began with Eduardo's smirk, then spread like a virus to the men around him. One of them, overweight, tie loosened, turned to the other and said, "Loud enough for me to hear. Look at that. Even beggars have artistic talent now." More laughter. Eduardo bent down slightly. Not enough to meet her eye level, just enough to make it look like he was giving attention. His smile was condescending, the kind you give a child who says they want to be an astronaut. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with false kindness, "you don't learn to play the violin on the streets. That takes years of study, expensive teachers, discipline. You're brave, I'll give you that, but," he shrugged, "maybe you should find another way to get food. Some people are hiring helpers, you know?" The men around him laughed louder this time. My stomach turned. The girl didn't move. She just gripped the violin tighter, as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing right there on the cold stone pavement. I saw her eyes glisten, not with anger, but with something worse. Resignation, as if she had expected this, as if the world had already taught her that people like her didn't even deserve a chance. "I can play," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Eduardo was already turning his back, straightening his jacket, when one of the theater security guards approached to deal with the situation. That's when something inside me snapped. "Wait!" I shouted without thinking. Everyone turned to me. Eduardo frowned, annoyed by the interruption. The security guard froze. And the girl, she looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was hope mixed with fear, like she wanted to believe someone might stand up for her, but life had taught her never to trust that feeling. "I'm sorry," I said, stepping closer with my camera hanging around my neck. "I'm a journalist. I'm covering the event, and I think it would make an interesting story to let her play. Just 1 minute. What harm could it do?" Eduardo looked at me like I was insane. The other men exchanged glances. "Are you serious?" Eduardo asked, in that tone of someone who can't believe their time is being wasted. "Completely," I replied, heart pounding. "It'll be quick, and who knows, maybe she actually can play." A long, uncomfortable silence followed. I could feel dozens of eyes on us. The event was starting, important guests were arriving, and there we were, debating whether a homeless girl deserved 30 seconds of attention. Eduardo sighed. That kind of sigh powerful people give when they're redoing something absurd that costs them nothing but might help their image. "Fine," he said, glancing at his watch. 1 minute. But after that, she needs to leave. The girl looked at me, then at him, then at the violin in her hands. She swallowed hard. I saw her hands shake as she positioned the instrument against her shoulder. The strings were crooked, the bow missing horsehair in places. "You can play," I whispered softly, trying to give her courage. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then she began. The first sounds were hesitant, almost drowned out by the chatter in the theater. Some people didn't even notice. Eduardo crossed his arms, that "I told you so" smile already forming at the corner of his mouth. But then, something changed. The music started to grow. Not just in volume, in intensity. Each note carried a weight, a story, a pain so deep it couldn't fit into words. It was as if that broken violin and that fragile girl were just vessels for something far greater. Something ancient, something sacred. People began to stop walking. The noise slowly died. I saw Eduardo uncross his arms almost involuntarily. And then, I recognized the music. It was Bach's Chaconne, one of the most difficult and emotional pieces ever written for the violin. The kind of piece great masters spend years perfecting. And she was playing it. This barefoot girl in torn clothes with hunger written on her face was playing as if she'd been born with that violin in her hands. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching this story from. I want to know how far this emotion reaches. When she reached the most dramatic part of the piece, something unbelievable happened. She opened her eyes and I saw tears streaming down her face, but she didn't stop. She kept playing. And the music, God, the music seemed to come alive. I looked around. People were frozen. Some had their hands over their mouths. Others had tears in their eyes. Elegant couples who moments ago were talking about investments and vacations were now completely silent, trapped in that moment. And Eduardo was pale. All the arrogance was gone from his face. He looked at the girl as if he were seeing a ghost. His hands, once confidently in his pockets, now trembled slightly at his sides. The music went on for another 2 minutes, far more than the 1 minute promised. But no one dared to interrupt. It would have been like trying to stop a storm. When the final note echoed through the night, we were all suspended in that impossible moment. The girl slowly lowered the violin, wiped her tears with the back of her dirty hand, and waited. No one spoke, until someone began to clap, then another, and another. Within seconds, that small crowd of wealthy, important people was giving a standing ovation to a girl they hadn't even noticed existed moments before. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Eduardo, because for the first time that night, I saw something different in his face. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was something deeper. Recognition, as if he had just realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. He took a step forward, then stopped, opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Finally, in a strangely hoarse voice, he asked, Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl stared at him. For a long moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then, in that soft, tired voice, she said just 3 words that would change everything. My father taught me. 3 words. Just 3 simple words that hung in the air like smoke after a fire. You can't quite see what burned, but you know something important has been destroyed. I saw Eduardo's face change. It wasn't gradual. It was instant. Like someone had turned on the lights in a dark room and he finally saw what had been there all along. His eyebrows furrowed, his mouth opened slightly, and he took another step toward the girl. "Your father?" he repeated. And there was something in his voice, an urgency that hadn't been there before. "Who is your father?" The girl didn't answer immediately. She just held the violin tightly against her chest, as if the instrument were a shield against the world. Her eyes scanned the faces around her, all those beautiful, perfumed, well-fed people, and then returned to Eduardo. "He died," she said simply. The silence that followed was the kind that hurts. You know that kind. Not just the absence of sound, but the presence of pain. That was exactly it. I saw several people look away, uncomfortable, as if witnessing that confession was too intimate. But Eduardo didn't look away. He stepped closer, completely ignoring the other businessmen who were still there, confused witnesses to that strange scene. "What was his name?" Eduardo asked. And now there was something almost desperate in his voice. The girl hesitated. Her fingers pressed the strings of the violin, producing a sharp, off-key sound that seemed to awaken something inside her. When she finally spoke, it was in such a soft whisper that I had to lean in to hear. Rafael Mendez." I swear I saw Eduardo stagger. Literally, as if someone had punched him in the stomach. One of the men beside him even reached out to steady him, worried. "It can't be," Eduardo muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "It can't be." I didn't understand what was happening. Nobody did. But it was obvious that that name, Rafael Mendez, meant something. Something big. Something powerful enough to make an 800 millionaire completely lose his composure. You knew him?" the girl asked, and for the first time since I saw her, there was a different light in her eyes. Hope. The most dangerous emotion when you've already lost everything. Eduardo didn't answer. He was staring at the violin in her hands as if he were seeing an archaeological artifact. Something that shouldn't exist. Something belonging to another time. "May I see that violin?" he asked, reaching out his hand. The girl instinctively stepped back, clutching the instrument against her chest. "It's mine," she said, with a fierceness that contrasted with her fragility. "It's all I have left of him." "I know," Eduardo said. His voice completely changed. The arrogance had vanished. What remained was something more human, something broken. "I just need to be sure of something. Please." There was a silent negotiation between them, a long look, heavy with meaning I couldn't decipher. Finally, with painful reluctance, the girl handed him the violin. Eduardo took it with surprising delicacy, as if holding something sacred. His hands that signed million-dollar contracts, shook hands with politicians and businessmen, trembled as he turned the instrument over, examining every inch. Then he froze, completely, as if he'd just read his own death sentence. On the back of the violin, almost hidden beneath the peeling varnish and years of grime, something was engraved. Eduardo ran his thumb over it, carefully cleaning, and I could see it. Initials, RM, and below them, a date, 2011. "My God," Eduardo whispered. And then, to my utter shock, I saw something I never thought I'd see. A tear, a single tear rolling down the face of a man who probably hadn't cried since childhood. "He made this," Eduardo said, his voice breaking. "He made this violin for you?" The girl blinked, confused. You really knew my father?" Eduardo handed the violin back to her with reverent care. He closed his eyes for a long moment, as if fighting something inside him. When he finally spoke, his words fell like stones into still water. Rafael Mendez wasn't just a violinist, he was one of the greatest talents this country has ever seen. A prodigy, a genius. The world around us seemed to disappear. It was just the girl, Eduardo, and that impossible revelation hanging between them. "I met him 15 years ago," Eduardo continued, staring into the distance, lost in memory. "I had just inherited the family business. I was arrogant, foolish, thinking money was everything. Then I went to a concert, a charity performance, ironically enough, and there he was, your father, playing a borrowed Stradivarius from the conservatory." Eduardo paused, wiping his face. I'd never heard anything like it. It was as if the music wasn't coming from the violin, but from somewhere deeper, from his soul, from his very existence. Half the audience was crying by the end. I was crying. The girl listened motionless, every word falling on her like divine revelation. "After the concert, I approached him," Eduardo went on. "I offered to fund his entire career. International tours, the best teachers, performances in the greatest concert halls in the world. I wanted to be part of it. Of that talent. As if somehow it would redeem me from being just another empty rich man." He laughed bitterly without joy. "And do you know what he did? He refused. He said he didn't need my money. That music wasn't about fame or fortune, but about truth, about feeling. He said I didn't understand because I'd never had to fight for anything." Eduardo looked directly at the girl now, and there was so much pain in his gaze that even I felt it. I was furious, offended. How dare he reject my generosity? I had power, money, influence, and he only had talent and principles. "What happened to him?" I asked, unable to stay silent any longer. Eduardo swallowed hard. "I used my influence. Talked to conservatory directors, event organizers, sponsors. I didn't do anything illegal. I just used my power to make sure doors closed for Rafael Mendez. That he wouldn't get important performances. That his name would be forgotten before it was even known." The air left my lungs. The girl was pale, clutching the violin so tightly that her knuckles were white. I destroyed him, Eduardo said, tears now falling freely. I destroyed one of this country's greatest talents because my ego couldn't handle rejection. And then I just moved on. Built buildings, made more money, forgot, or tried to. He never forgot the music, the girl suddenly said, her voice carrying an emotion far too big for her small body. Even after everything fell apart, even when we had nowhere to live, even when he got sick, her voice cracked. She took a deep breath, fighting back tears. He kept teaching me. Every night. It didn't matter if we'd eaten or not, if it was cold or raining through the broken roof. He took this violin, the only thing left after we sold everything, and he taught me. He said music was the only thing no one could take from us. The only thing that was truly ours. Tears now ran down her face, mixing with dirt and leaving clean trails on her cheeks. When he died 2 years ago, I was alone, but I had the violin, and I had everything he taught me. So I play. In the streets, in squares, anywhere someone will listen. Because as long as I play, he's not really dead. He's here. She pressed the violin against her chest. He's here. I was crying. I hadn't even noticed, but tears were streaming down my face. I looked around and saw I wasn't alone. Many people, women in elegant dresses, men in tuxedos, were discreetly wiping their eyes. Eduardo was devastated, completely shattered. He fell to his knees right there on the cold stone floor in front of everyone, covering his face with his hands. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I took everything from him. His career, his future, his dignity. And now you're here, on the street, hungry. And I laughed at you. I laughed at the daughter of the man I destroyed." The girl looked at him, that powerful, wealthy, influential man now broken on the floor, and something extraordinary happened. She knelt down too. She got to his level. And with a gentleness that shouldn't exist in someone who had every reason in the world to hate, she said, "My father taught me that everyone deserves a second chance, that to err is human. What defines us is not the mistake, but what we do after it." Eduardo lifted his face, his eyes red, disbelieving. "Are you hungry?" he asked, his voice still trembling. She nodded. "Very. Then let's fix that first," he said, standing up and extending his hand to her. "And after that, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix what I broke." Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. When she took his hand, something shifted in the air. It was as if the universe had adjusted something fundamental in the order of things, as if two broken stories had just found a way to heal each other. But this was only the beginning, because none of us knew at that moment that Rafael Mendes's story was far bigger than anyone imagined, and that worn-out violin in the hands of a hungry girl carried secrets that were about to shake not only Eduardo's life, but the entire world of classical music. The restaurant was the kind you only see in movies, the kind of place where every fork probably costs more than a month's rent. Soft lights, perfectly spaced tables balancing privacy and sophistication, and waiters who moved like silent ghosts. Eduardo had insisted on taking the girl there, not for the charity event. That no longer mattered, but for dinner. A real dinner. I went along. I'm not even sure how, but somehow I had become part of that story. Eduardo didn't ask me to leave, and the girl seemed to feel safer with another woman around. So there I was, sitting at a 5-star restaurant, witnessing something that would completely change the trajectory of 2 lives. The girl's name was Helena. That was the first thing we learned when we finally sat down. Helena Mendes, 12 years old, almost 13, 2 years living on the streets of São Paulo, sleeping in shelters when she could, under building awnings when she couldn't, 2 meals a day when she was lucky, none when she wasn't. I watched as she looked at the menu like it was written in an alien language. Her dirty fingers left faint marks on the pristine pages. Eduardo noticed and with a discreet gesture called the waiter. "Bring everything," he simply said. "All the appetizers, all the main courses, all the desserts, and a fresh orange juice. The biggest one you have." The waiter blinked, confused, but nodded and disappeared. Helena looked at Eduardo with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion, like a wounded animal that wants to trust but has learned that trust hurts. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I know," Eduardo replied, "but I want to, and besides, He hesitated, as if the next words were hard to form. I owe you far more than a dinner. I owe it to your father's memory. An uncomfortable silence followed. Eduardo fidgeted with the napkin on the table, avoiding Helena's gaze. Finally, she broke the silence. Did you really destroy him? She asked. There was no accusation in her voice. Just curiosity, like she needed to understand. Eduardo closed his eyes. Yes. Why? Because I was young, stupid, and powerful. The worst combination possible. He opened his eyes and looked directly at her. Your father made me feel small. Not because of anything he said, but because of what he represented. He had something all my money couldn't buy. Purpose. Meaning. He knew who he was. And I had no idea. Helena processed this in silence. Her fingers tapped on the table, unconsciously following a rhythm I recognized. The same rhythm from the chaconne she had played earlier. He talked about you, Helena suddenly said. Eduardo's head snapped up. What? In the last months before he died. He was very sick. High fever, coughing blood. I begged him to go to the hospital, but he said we didn't have the money. So he would lie on that thin mattress on the floor of the room we rented, and sometimes he would start rambling. She paused, her eyes distant, lost in memory. He said your name, Eduardo. He said, I should have accepted, Eduardo. I should have accepted. I didn't understand. I asked who Eduardo was, but he just cried and kept apologizing. To me, to my mom who died when I was born. To you, he apologized to everyone. A tear rolled down Eduardo's face. He didn't even try to wipe it away. He had nothing to apologize for, Eduardo said, his voice rough. Nothing. I'm the one who took everything from him. Not everything, Helena corrected, and there was a strange strength in her voice. You took his career, the concerts, the recognition, but you didn't take the music. He kept that, and he gave it to me. That was when the food started arriving. Dish after dish, an absurd amount of food for 3 people. But Eduardo didn't care. He watched Helena eat with a hunger that was painful to witness. Not because it was improper, but because it showed how much she had starved. How many days she had survived on crumbs. She ate until she couldn't anymore. And even then, with the table still full, she began to stash pieces of bread in the pocket of her tattered dress. For later, she explained, embarrassed when she noticed us watching. Eduardo cleared his throat. Helena, I want to make you an offer. She stopped stashing bread and looked at him cautious. I want to help you. I want you to have a home, food, clothes. I want you to go back to school, and most importantly, he took a deep breath. I want you to have the chance your father never had. I want to fund your career as a violinist. Helena went very still. So still I could hear her breathing. Why? She finally asked. Because of guilt? Eduardo considered the question honestly. Yes, he admitted. A lot of guilt. But also because when I heard you play today, I felt what I felt 15 years ago when I heard your father. You have the same gift, the same soul in your music. And this time, his voice faltered. This time I want to do the right thing. Helena looked at the violin, carefully resting on the chair beside her. She never let it out of her sight, not even to eat. My father made me promise him one thing before he died, she said slowly. He held my hand so weak I could barely feel it and said, Helena, promise you'll keep playing. No matter what happens, you play, because music is bigger than us, bigger than any pain, any injustice. Music is the truth, and the world needs truth. She looked at Eduardo. I promised. So yes, I'll accept your help. Not for me, but because I promised him. Eduardo nodded, unable to speak. I saw his hands tremble slightly as he picked up his glass of water and drank. Then I noticed something strange. Eduardo was looking at the violin with an almost obsessive intensity. It wasn't just interest. It was recognition, as if he was seeing something we couldn't. Helena, he suddenly said, can I examine the violin again? More carefully this time? She hesitated, then nodded and handed the instrument across the table. Eduardo took it with the same reverence as before, but now he was truly examining it, turning it over, looking through the F-holes, running his fingers along the edges, gently tapping the wood to hear the sound. Then he froze. Completely. It can't be, he murmured. What is it? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his phone and called someone. The person answered on the second ring. Marcelo, it's me. I need you to come to Fasano right now. Bring your equipment. Yes, the analysis equipment. No, I can't wait until tomorrow. It's urgent. Extremely urgent. He hung up and looked at Helena. How long did your father have this violin? Helena frowned, thinking. Always. He said he got it as a gift when he was young. From a teacher who believed in him. Did he ever mention the teacher's name? Some Italian name, I think. Benedetto? Something like that. Eduardo's face went white, completely drained of color. He placed the violin on the table as if it suddenly weighed a ton. Benedetto Rossi, he whispered. Who? I asked. Eduardo looked at me, eyes filled with disbelief. Benedetto Rossi was one of the greatest luthiers, violin makers, of the 20th century. He lived in Cremona, Italy, and crafted instruments only for the greatest masters. Each of his violins is worth easily over $500,000, sometimes much more. My stomach dropped. You're saying? I'm saying, Eduardo interrupted, staring at the battered violin on the table, that it's possible, remotely possible, that this instrument Helena has been playing on the streets of São Paulo, exposed to rain, sun, and cold, isn't just any violin. It could be a masterpiece. Helena was pale. But it's all cracked. The varnish is peeling. There are scratches. Surface damage, Eduardo said, his voice quickening with excitement. Damage that can be repaired. If, and it's a big if, this really is a Rossi, the internal structure, the wood, the craftsmanship, all of it is still intact. I noticed the sound when you played. It was too good for an ordinary violin, too rich. And the shape is characteristic of Rossi. 20 minutes later, a man in his 50s arrived at the restaurant carrying a metal case. Marcelo Tavares, I learned, was one of Latin America's leading experts in antique instruments. He greeted Eduardo quickly, then his eyes fell on the violin on the table. He froze for a long moment, just staring. May I? He asked Helena, who nervously nodded. What followed was a meticulous analysis that lasted almost an hour. Marcelo used magnifiers, ultraviolet lights, measured dimensions, examined the wood, the glue, every inch of the instrument. Eduardo, Helena, and I watched in tense silence. Finally, Marcelo placed the violin back on the table. His hands were slightly trembling. He looked at Eduardo, then at Helena, then back at Eduardo. It's a Rossi, he said, his voice thick with emotion. A genuine Benedetto Rossi from 1967, one of the last he ever made before he died, and not just any Rossi. He paused dramatically. It's the Rossi that disappeared more than 20 years ago, the Angelo Caduto, the fallen angel. It was made for Dmitry Volkov, the Russian violinist, but he died in a car crash before he could play it. The instrument just vanished. The last anyone heard of it was in 2001, at a conservatory in São Paulo. He looked at Helena with something close to reverence. This violin is worth easily $2 million, maybe more at auction. The silence that followed was the kind you can physically feel, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Helena looked at the violin, her father's gift, the only thing left of her family, then back at us. 2 million? She repeated, as if the words didn't make sense. Eduardo was smiling, but there were tears in his eyes. Raphael didn't just have talent, Helena. He had a treasure, and he left it for you. Helena picked up the violin with trembling hands. He never told me. He never said it was worth so much. Because to him it wasn't about money, Eduardo said softly. It was about music, art, his connection with you. That was the real value. Helena hugged the violin and finally, she broke. All that control, all that street-tough strength she had needed to survive, crumbled. She cried. Sobs shook her, and Eduardo, the man who had started the night by laughing at her, stood up, walked around the table and embraced her, and, "You will never go hungry again," he promised. "You will never sleep on the streets again. You will never be alone again. I swear it on your father's memory." And for the first time in 2 years, Helena let someone hold her while she cried. But even in that overwhelming moment, my journalist mind was working. Because there was something there. Something bigger than just a story of personal redemption. If Rafael Mendez had this violin, if he was as talented as Eduardo claimed, why had he simply vanished? Why did no one talk about him anymore? And more importantly, what else was hidden in the story of this man and his extraordinary daughter? The answers to those questions would come soon, and they would be even more surprising than everything we had discovered so far. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the restaurant. 3 weeks that changed everything. Helena was now living in one of Eduardo's properties, a spacious apartment in Higienopolis, overlooking the city she used to know only from the streets. She had new clothes, food in the fridge, a real bed. But the biggest change was in her eyes. There was something there now beyond survival. There was a future. I kept following the story. I couldn't walk away. There was something magnetic about that journey, something that told me we were nowhere near the end. Eduardo had given me full access, maybe because he wanted someone to document everything, maybe because his guilt needed witnesses for his redemption, or maybe simply because he also felt that this story was bigger than all of us. The Angelo Caduto, the violin, was now in the hands of Marcelo Tavares for restoration, a delicate process that would take months. But Eduardo didn't wait for that. He got another violin for Helena, a professional instrument that, although not a Rossi, was exponentially better than anything she had ever played. And then came the teacher. Professor Yuki Nakamura was 67 years old and a living legend in the world of classical music. She had been the first violinist of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, had taught some of the greatest contemporary names, and was known for her relentless standards and her almost supernatural ability to see potential where others only saw technique. When Eduardo called her, offering any amount of money to evaluate Helena, Yuki refused the payment. But she agreed to come. Not for money, she didn't need it anymore, but because Eduardo mentioned Rafael Mendez. And apparently, like Eduardo, Yuki also had a history with that name. I was present at the first lesson. Eduardo had asked me to document everything and I accepted. Camera in hand, sitting silently in a corner of the music studio he had set up in the apartment. Yuki entered the room like a contained storm. Short gray hair pulled into a perfect bun, black eyes that seemed to see through people. She looked at Helena, nervous, holding the new violin with sweaty hands, and said nothing for a long moment. "Play," she ordered. No introductions, no pleasantries. Helena looked at Eduardo, who nodded encouragingly. She positioned the violin, took a deep breath, and began to play the same Bach chaconne she had played on the night everything changed. Yuki listened, motionless, eyes closed. When Helena finished, there was a silence that seemed to last an eternity. "Again," Yuki said, "but this time, forget everything you know. Play as if you were talking to me. Not with technique, not with correct notes. Play what you feel." Helena hesitated, clearly confused. But then she closed her eyes and started again. This time it was different. The notes were the same, but something else was there. Something raw, exposed. Every movement of the bow carried weight. Every note contained a story. Pain, loss, hope, all mixed into a language that transcended words. When she finished, Yuki opened her eyes. And to my complete surprise, there were tears in them. "Rafael taught you," Yuki said. It wasn't a question. Helena nodded. I recognized it. The way you hold the bow, the way you breathe between phrases, the way you close your eyes in the most intense moments. Yuki stepped closer, placing a hand on Helena's shoulder. "You play exactly like him. It's uncanny." "You knew him?" Helena asked, eyes wide. Yuki sighed, a heavy sound full of old memories. "Yes, Rafael was my student, a long time ago, before everything fell apart." Eduardo, who was leaning against the wall, straightened up. "You were his teacher?" "For 2 years, Yuki confirmed. "He came to the conservatory in 2007 at age 23. He came from a poor family in Minas Gerais, had saved for years to pay for lessons, and from the first time I heard him play, I knew he would be special. Not just good, special. The kind of talent that appears once in a generation. She walked to the window, looking out at the city. But Raphael had a problem. He didn't know how to sell himself. He didn't understand the political game of classical music. He thought talent was enough. And most of the time it isn't. That's when I showed up, Eduardo muttered to himself. Yuki turned. Ah yes, the savior tycoon. Her voice was acidic. I was there when you made the offer. I warned Raphael to accept. I told him the classical music world was cruel, that he needed protection, resources. But she shook her head. He was proud, stubborn. He said he would do it his way or not at all. And I made sure it wasn't at all, Eduardo added, guilt heavy in his voice. Yuki looked at him with something that wasn't quite forgiveness but perhaps understanding. You weren't the only one. After you closed the main doors, others saw an opportunity. Conductors with their own protégés, jealous musicians, organizers wanting favors. Raphael was systematically shut out and She closed her eyes. I couldn't help him. I tried, but my influence had limits. What happened then? I asked, unable to stay silent. He disappeared, Yuki said simply. In 2010, he just stopped showing up for classes, stopped answering calls. I went to his apartment once, but it was empty. It was like he'd been erased from existence. Helena listened with a pained expression. That's when I was born, she said quietly. 2010. My mom died during childbirth. He was left alone with me. Are you feeling as emotional as I am? Comment where you're watching this story from. He chose you over music, Yuki said, and there was admiration in her voice. Many wouldn't. Many would abandon a child to chase the dream. But Raphael, he was different. But he never stopped playing, Helena added. And he never stopped teaching me. Even when we were on the streets, even when he was dying. Yuki stepped closer again, this time studying Helena with renewed intensity. Show me your hands. Helena extended her hands. Small, still calloused from holding the violin for hours, but also marked by life on the streets. Scratches, small scars, worn nails. Yuki turned them over, examining the fingers, the flexibility of the wrists. You have the same hands as him. Long fingers, flexible wrists, and more importantly, she looked into Helena's eyes. You have the same fire. That rare thing that makes a musician transcend technique and touch people's souls. She turned to Eduardo. You want me to teach her? Yes, Eduardo replied immediately. I want her to have everything Raphael deserved. All the preparation, all the training, all the opportunities. Yuki considered this for a long moment. It will be hard. She has huge technical gaps. Raphael taught her the basics well, but 2 years living on the streets created bad habits. It will take years of intense work. I can do it, Helena said suddenly, her voice firm. I promised him. I'll do it. Yuki smiled. The first time I saw her smile. Then we start. But first, she looked at Eduardo. There's something you need to know. About Raphael, about the violin, about why all of this is connected in a way you can't imagine. Eduardo frowned. What do you mean? Yuki went to her bag and pulled out an old yellowed folder. When Raphael disappeared, he left some things at the conservatory. Most were discarded, but I kept this folder. I always thought someone would come looking for it one day. She opened the folder and spread photographs across the table. Old photographs, some black and white, others faded color. This one, she pointed to a specific photo, was taken in Cremona, Italy, in 2006. Raphael went there on a 3-month scholarship to study violin making. In the photo, a young Raphael, no more than 22, skinny, smiling, stood next to an elderly man with white hair and round glasses. Between them, on a table, was a violin under construction. That man, Yuki continued, is Benedetto Rossi, Eduardo grabbed the photo, eyes wide. Rafael knew Rossi personally? More than that, Yuki said, her voice becoming mysterious. Rafael was Rossi's apprentice for those 3 months, and apparently, Rossi saw something special in him. So special that when Rafael returned to Brazil, Rossi sent him a gift. Helena gasped. The Angelo Caduto. Exactly, Yuki confirmed. But it wasn't just a gift, it was a legacy. Rossi was dying of cancer. He knew he had little time, and he chose Rafael, a talented young man from a distant country, to be the guardian of his last masterpiece. She pulled another document from the folder, a letter written in Italian with a Portuguese translation attached. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. Eduardo read aloud. Dear Rafael, this violin carries my soul. It was made for Dimitri, but destiny had other plans. Now it belongs to you. Not because you are the best violinist, though you are extraordinary, but because you understand what this instrument truly is. It's not a tool. It's a voice. And voices must be heard. One day when you find someone who can make this voice sing louder than you, pass it on. That is the purpose of great works of art. Not to be owned, but to live. Benedetto Rossi, March 15, 2007. The silence that followed was sacred. Helena was crying quietly. He passed it to me. The violin. Before he died, he said it was mine now. I didn't understand why at the time. I thought it was just because there was no one else. But it wasn't that. He saw in you what Rossi saw in him, Yuki said gently. The gift, the ability to make the instrument live. Eduardo was pale. Rafael wasn't just a talented violinist. He was Rossi's chosen one, the musical heir of one of history's greatest luthiers. And He swallowed hard. I destroyed that. You didn't destroy it, Yuki corrected. You delayed it. Because now... She looked at Helena with intense eyes. Now we have a second chance. Helena isn't just Rafael's daughter. She's the continuation of a lineage. Her father's talent, Rossi's legacy, a tradition that spans centuries. She turned to Eduardo. You want redemption? Then don't just give her lessons. Give the world what you took away. Give them Helena Mendes. How? Eduardo asked. Yuki smiled, and this time, there was something almost predatory in her smile. The Tchaikovsky International Violin Competition. It takes place in Moscow in 18 months. It's the most prestigious violin competition in the world. Winners have their careers guaranteed overnight. Contracts with the biggest orchestras, performances in the most important halls, worldwide recognition. 18 months, Eduardo repeated. Can she be ready in 18 months? Yuki looked at Helena. Really looked. As if measuring not just talent but willpower, determination, the capacity to endure the impossible. Normally it would take 5 years to prepare someone for that level, but Helena isn't normal. She paused. It will require everything from her. 6-7 hours of practice a day. Sacrifice of anything that resembles a normal life. It will be painful, exhausting, sometimes unbearable. She knelt in front of Helena eye to eye. Are you willing to do this? Not for your father, not for Eduardo, not for redemption or revenge, but for yourself? Because if you don't want this with every fiber of your being, it won't work. Helena didn't hesitate for a second. I want this. My father taught me that music is truth, and the world needs to hear that truth. If I can do that, if I can honor him that way, then yes, I'm willing to give up everything. Yuki nodded, satisfied. Then we start tomorrow, at 6 a.m. 6 a.m., Helena repeated. 6 a.m., Yuki confirmed. And I hope you slept well, because it'll be the last good night's sleep you'll have for the next 18 months. That night, after Yuki left, I stayed with Eduardo and Helena in the apartment. There was a strange energy in the air, a mix of expectation and fear. Eduardo stood on the balcony, looking out at the illuminated city below. Do you think it's possible? He asked when I approached. To turn a girl who was living on the streets 3 weeks ago into a world-class competitor in 18 months? I don't know, I answered honestly. But I've heard her play. And if anyone can do the impossible, I think it's her. He nodded, still worried. What if I'm wrong again? What if I'm putting too much pressure on her? What if this is just my ego trying to fix the past without thinking about what's best for Helena? Then you ask her, I said simply. You give her the choice you never gave her father. Eduardo fell silent for a long moment. Then he went back inside where Helena was sitting on the couch holding the new violin. Not playing, just holding it, as if having a silent conversation with it. Helena, Eduardo said, sitting beside her. Are you sure about this? Because if it's too much, if you just want a normal life, to study normal things, do normal kid stuff, I understand. You don't owe me anything. Helena looked at him with eyes far too old for her age. What's a normal life for someone like me? I don't know how to be normal. I know how to survive. And I know how to play. Those are the only two things I truly know how to do. She hugged the violin tighter. When my father died, I was completely alone. No one, nothing, nowhere to go. All I had was this violin and the music he taught me. And you know what I discovered? When I played, even on the street, even hungry, even cold, I wasn't alone, because his music was still there, alive, through me. Tears were streaming down her face now. If I can make the world hear that, if I can make people feel what I feel when I play, then my father didn't really die. He lives on, in the music, in me. And maybe, she looked at Eduardo, maybe that's the only kind of redemption that truly matters. Not undoing the past, but creating something beautiful from its scars. Eduardo couldn't hold it in anymore. He hugged Helena, this brave, broken, extraordinary girl, and cried. He cried for the first time since he was 20. Cried for Raphael, for Helena, for all the lost years, for all the wrong choices. And as they held each other, I pressed the record button on my camera, because I knew I was documenting the beginning of something historic. Helena Mendez's journey was only just beginning, and the world had no idea what was coming. Everything changed after that night. Helena went from an unknown girl to a sensation almost overnight. The recording of the recital, which I had made with Eduardo's permission, ended up in the right hands. First, it quietly circulated among musicians and teachers. Then someone posted a clip on YouTube. Within a week, it had 2 million views. The comments were a mix of admiration and skepticism. Who is this girl? Incredible technique for someone so young. Is her story real? It sounds like a movie script. I don't believe she was on the streets 6 months ago. Impossible. And then came the critics, because they always do. Articles started to appear questioning the legitimacy of her story. Some suggested it was all a marketing stunt by Eduardo. Others hinted that Helena couldn't really be that good, that the videos were edited, dubbed, fabricated. Brazil and its new musical Cinderella, reality or manufactured fairy tale, read the headline of a major newspaper. I watched Helena read that article. I saw the light in her eyes dim a little. Her hands trembled as she held the phone. Why don't they believe me? She asked, her voice small. Why is it so hard to believe that someone like me can be good at something? Yuki, who was there, answered with her characteristic bluntness. Because it's easier to doubt than to admire. Admiration forces people to confront their own limitations. Skepticism lets them feel superior without doing anything. But what if they're right? Helena insisted. What if I'm not that good? What if it's just luck or pity? It was Eduardo who stepped forward, taking the phone from her hands with firm but gentle resolve. Helena, look at me. Do you want to know the truth? She nodded, eyes wide. There will always be people who don't believe in you. Always. No matter how many times you prove yourself. Because other people's success makes some feel bad about their own lives. So they attack. They doubt. They tear down. He placed his hands on her shoulders. But do you know the best response to those people? It's not words. It's excellence. It's walking onto that stage in Moscow, and being so undeniably brilliant that even the harshest critics have to shut up. Helena took a deep breath, processing it. So I have to be perfect? No, Yuki immediately corrected. You have to be authentic. Perfection is boring. Perfection is technique without soul. What you need to be is true. And that you already are. But the pressure was mounting, and it began to take its toll. The following months were a brutal escalation of intensity. 8 hours of practice a day, sometimes 10. Technical studies in the morning, repertoire pieces in the afternoon, performance simulations at night. Helena's fingers developed permanent calluses. She began to have pain in her shoulder, neck, and back. Physical therapy twice a week was the only thing keeping her body functioning. I documented everything, but it became hard to watch. There were moments when Helena played with tears streaming down her face, not from emotion, but from pure exhaustion. Moments when she finished a session and simply collapsed on the floor, unable to move. Is this normal? I asked Yuki privately, genuinely worried. For the level we're aiming for? Yes, Yuki replied flatly. Mozart started at 3, Menuhin at 4, Midori at 6. All these prodigies had over a decade of preparation before competing internationally. Helena has 18 months. We're compressing years of development into months. It's going to hurt. But what if we break her? I insisted. Yuki gave me a look that was hard to read. She's already been broken. By the streets, by hunger, by the loss of her father. What we're doing now is teaching her to turn those broken pieces into something strong, into a mosaic. But yes, she looked away. There's a risk we might break her in a way that can't be fixed. It was a chilling admission. Things got worse in the 9th month. Helena began to have nightmares. I could hear them through the wall. Eduardo had given me a room in his apartment so I could document everything closely. And her screams in the middle of the night were heartbreaking. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I entered her room and found her sitting on the bed, drenched in sweat, hugging her knees. The same nightmare? I asked gently, sitting at the edge of her bed. She nodded. I'm on stage, in Moscow, and when I start to play, no sound comes out. I try and try, but the violin is silent, and everyone's laughing, just like that first night. Except this time my dad is in the audience, and he's disappointed in me. My heart broke. Helena, your father would never be disappointed in you, never. You don't know that, she said, her voice cracking. What if he's watching? What if he's somewhere out there, realizing I'm not good enough, that I wasted his gift, the violin, the lessons, all the sacrifice? What if I ruin everything? What if you don't? I said softly. What if you're extraordinary? What if you honor him exactly the way he wanted? She looked at me with red, tired eyes. How can I know? I had no answer, so I just held her hand until she fell back asleep. In the 10th month, the incident that almost ended everything happened. Helena was in the middle of a practice session when she suddenly froze mid-phrase, just stopped. The bow suspended in the air, her eyes fixed on some invisible point ahead. Helena, Yuki called, keep going. Nothing. She didn't move. Helena! Yuki approached, concern coloring her voice for the first time. What's happening? Then Helena started trembling. First her hands, then her entire body. The violin fell to the floor with a terrible sound. One of the strings snapped on impact. I can't, she whispered. I can't anymore. And then she collapsed. Eduardo called me from the hospital 2 hours later. Severe exhaustion, mild malnutrition. She had been so focused on practicing that she forgot to eat. And what the doctors called acute psychological burnout. They want to keep her for a few days, Eduardo said, guilt heavy in his voice. They say she needs real rest, not just a night's sleep, weeks. And the competition? I asked. There are 8 months left. Silence on the other end. Then, maybe it's not worth it. If this destroys her, maybe we should stop. But the person who said it wasn't Eduardo. It was Helena. I visited her the next day. She was lying in the white hospital bed, hooked up to an IV, staring out the window. She looked so small, so fragile. It was hard to believe this girl carried such immense talent. "Hi," I said softly, sitting by her bed. "Hi," she answered without turning her eyes from the window. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted. "So tired. It's like I've run a marathon every day for the past 10 months and my body finally said, enough. The doctor said you need real rest." "I know." There was a long pause. Then she finally looked at me, and something in her eyes had changed. Determination mixed with fear. "But I'm not giving up," she said firmly. "Helena." "No," she interrupted. "I know what everyone's thinking. That I should stop, that it's too much, that it's not worth it. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'll get on that stage in Moscow and be mediocre. Maybe I'll prove all the critics right." She gripped the sheets tightly. "But do you know what's worse than trying and failing? It's not trying. It's wondering for the rest of your life. What if? My father never had that chance. He never got to show the world what he was capable of. But I have this chance. And if I give up now, I'm betraying not only his memory, but myself." Tears streamed down her face now. "I spent 2 years on the streets thinking I was worth nothing, invisible, that the world didn't care whether I existed or not. And now I have the chance to prove that people like me, broken people, people from dark places, can be extraordinary, can shine. How can I give that up?" I held her hand, my own vision blurred by tears. "Then don't give up," I said. "But don't destroy yourself either. You can do this in a healthier way. Rest when you need to. Eat properly. Give your body what it needs to recover." "I promise," she said. "But I need to get back to practice. I have to." And she did. But this time, it was different. Eduardo hired a nutritionist and a personal trainer specialized in athletes. Because elite musicians are athletes of the neuromuscular system, Yuki adjusted the schedule, adding mandatory breaks, rest days, meditation sessions. "You can't force excellence," Yuki explained. "Excellence emerges when body and mind are in harmony. Tension creates blocks, rest creates clarity." And slowly Helena began to recover. Not just physically, but mentally. There was a new lightness in her, an acceptance that the process mattered more than the result. In the 12th month, something magical happened. Helena was practicing one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire, the Sibelius Violin Concerto, known as the Everest of violin concertos, for its brutal technical and emotional demands. She had struggled with that piece for weeks. There was something in the third movement, fast, frenetic, requiring superhuman precision, that she simply couldn't master. Every time she tried, she stumbled somewhere, lost the rhythm, grew frustrated. But that day was different. She started playing and simply flowed. Her fingers danced along the fingerboard as if they had a mind of their own. The bow created sonic textures I didn't even know were possible. And the music, it wasn't just notes. It was storm, fire, passion so intense it seemed impossible for a human to produce. When she finished, Yuki was standing, tears streaming freely down her face. "You did it," Yuki whispered. "You finally did it. Not just playing the notes, but feeling the music, becoming the music." Helena was panting, as if she'd run a marathon. But there was a smile on her face, a smile of pure joy. "I felt my dad," she said, amazed. "While I was playing, I swear I felt him, as if he was here, playing through me." Eduardo, as always watching from the corner, was smiling through tears. "He's always been here," he said softly. "In every note, in every breath. Raphael never left you." It was in that moment that we all knew. Helena was ready. Not ready in the sense of perfect. She still had areas to improve, pieces to refine. But ready in the most important sense. She had found her voice, that unique, inimitable quality that separates good musicians from true artists. The last 6 months before the competition were dedicated to refinement, small adjustments, interpretative experiments, mental preparation. Yuki brought in guest musicians to play with Helena, simulating the experience of performing with an orchestra. Eduardo organized smaller concerts in conservatories, giving Helena stage experience in less intimidating environments. And slowly, her confidence grew. Not arrogance, Helena would never be arrogant, but a quiet certainty that she belonged in that world, that she had something valuable to offer. A month before the competition, we received the official news. Helena had been accepted as a competitor in the International Tchaikovsky competition. She was the youngest competitor that year, and the only Brazilian among the 20 violinists selected from around the world. The press went wild. Again. Cinderella of the streets heads to Moscow. Forgotten genius's daughter seeks redemption on the world's greatest stage. Helena Mendez, prodigy or marketing product. But this time, Helena didn't read the articles. She had learned to block out the noise, to focus on what mattered, the music. The week before the trip to Moscow, there was a small private ceremony. Marcelo Tavares had finally finished restoring the Angelo Caduto, Helena's father's violin, the masterpiece by Benedetto Rossi. When Helena saw it restored for the first time, she was speechless. The varnish glowed like honey under the light. Every curve of the wood was perfect. The new strings sang with crystal clarity. It was like seeing a Renaissance painting revealed after centuries of grime. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the instrument with reverence. "Play," Marcelo encouraged. Helena picked up the violin, her father's gift, Rossi's legacy, and played a simple scale. The sound that emerged was unlike anything I had ever heard. Rich, deep, complex. Each note carried layers of harmonics, textures that seemed impossible. It was like the difference between listening through cheap earbuds and a professional sound system. "It's perfect," Helena said, tears in her eyes. "It's like it's alive." "It is," Yuki said gently. "Instruments like this aren't objects. They're beings. They carry the soul of their maker, of everyone who's ever played them. And now, it carries you too." Helena looked at Eduardo. "Can I compete with it, instead of the other violin?" Eduardo and Yuki exchanged glances. It was Yuki who answered, "You can. But understand, using a Rossi in competition will create even higher expectations. People will judge not just you, but whether you're worthy of that instrument." "I know," Helena said calmly. "But this violin is part of the story, part of me. I need to play with it." And so it was decided. Helena Mendez would go to Moscow. She would compete on the most prestigious stage in classical music. She would play on a violin worth millions, and the whole world would be watching. But what none of us knew, what we couldn't have imagined, was that Helena wasn't just going to Moscow to compete. She was going to find the final missing piece of the puzzle, the ultimate secret about her father, and when we discovered it, it would change everything we thought we knew about Rafael Mendez and his extraordinary daughter. The cold in Moscow that October was something none of us were prepared to face. We stepped out of Sheremetyevo airport wrapped in coats Eduardo had hastily bought in São Paulo, but they proved completely useless against the biting wind that swept through the Russian capital. Helena was shivering. I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or nerves, as our van drove through the wide streets toward the hotel. I stared out the window, fascinated. Moscow was a city of brutal contrasts. Gray Soviet buildings stood beside ornate golden cathedrals. Luxury cars shared space with old buses. Wealth and poverty coexisted without ever truly mixing. In a way, it reminded me of Brazil. In another way, it reminded me of Helena's own journey. "It's big," Helena murmured, also staring outside. "Bigger than I imagined." "Moscow has 12 million people," Eduardo said, trying to sound reassuring. "But the Tchaikovsky Conservatory, where the competition will take place, is like an island in the middle of all this, a sanctuary for music." Yuki, sitting beside Helena, was unusually quiet. She looked out the window with an expression I couldn't decipher. There was history there, memories, but she didn't share them. We arrived at the hotel, an elegant place near the Bolshoi Theater, and were greeted with the cold efficiency typical of Russians. Our luggage was taken, documents checked, rooms assigned. Everything was professional, distant. That's when the first strange thing happened. We were in the lobby waiting for Eduardo to finish checking in when a woman approached. She must have been around 70, with white hair in a tight bun, piercing blue eyes, and a posture that screamed aristocracy. She moved straight toward Helena, ignoring the rest of us completely. "You are Helena Mendez," she said in English with a heavy Russian accent. It wasn't a question. Helena blinked, surprised. "Yes, I am." The woman studied her face for a long moment with an intensity that bordered on unsettling. Then suddenly her eyes filled with tears. "You look like him," she whispered. "God, you look exactly like him." "Like who?" Helena asked, confused. "Your father, Raphael." The woman took Helena's hands. "My name is Katerina Volkov. I knew your father, a long time ago, before you were born." Yuki, who had been silent until then, suddenly stiffened. "Katerina Volkov," she repeated, and there was something strange in her voice. "The pianist." "Yes," Katerina confirmed, finally looking at Yuki. "Yuki Nakamura, it's been a long time." "It has," Yuki replied, her tone carefully neutral. There was an undercurrent of tension I didn't understand. Before I could ask, Eduardo returned, immediately noticing the unusual scene. "What's going on?" he asked. Katerina released Helena's hands and straightened. "Forgive the intrusion. When I saw that Helena Mendez would be competing, I had to come. I had to see with my own eyes if it was true. If Raphael's daughter was really here." "How did you know my father?" Helena asked, urgency in her voice. Katerina hesitated, glancing around the busy lobby. "This is not a conversation for public places. Where are you having dinner tonight?" Eduardo, always practical, answered. "We haven't decided yet." "Then decide on my apartment," Katerina said firmly. 7 o'clock, I have a story to tell, a story Helena deserves to hear. She wrote down an address and handed it to Eduardo. "Please, it's important." Then she simply turned and left, leaving us all stunned. The rest of the day passed in a haze of confusion and anticipation. Helena could barely rest. She paced the room, picked up her violin, played a few notes, then put it down again. Her mind was clearly elsewhere. At exactly 7, we stood in front of an old but elegant building in Moscow's Arbat district. Katerina's apartment was on the 4th floor, and when the door opened, we stepped into a world frozen in time. The walls were covered with black and white photographs, musicians, concerts, moments captured across decades. A Steinway grand piano dominated the room, sheet music scattered on every available surface. It smelled like tea and old books. "Welcome," Katerina said, kettle already ready. "Sit down. This will take a while." We settled onto old but comfortable sofas. Katerina poured tea into delicate porcelain cups, a ritual that clearly mattered to her. Only once everyone was served did she begin. "I met Rafael Mendez in 2006, she began, her wrinkled hands wrapped around the cup. "He was in Cremona, studying with Benedetto Rossi. I was there visiting my brother, Dmitry Volkov." Helena gasped. "The violinist? The one the Angelo Caduto was made for?" "Yes," Katerina confirmed, a sad smile crossing her face. "My younger brother, a prodigy just like you. But with demons he couldn't control." She paused, eyes lost in memory. Dmitry struggled. Severe depression, crippling anxiety. He was brilliant on stage, but off it, he was destroying himself. Alcohol, drugs, self-destructive behavior. Our family tried everything, but nothing helped. "When did you meet my father?" Helena asked softly. Raphael was in Rossi's workshop when we arrived to collect the violin commissioned for Dimitri. The Angelo Caduto was almost finished. And Raphael? He was there, helping Rossi with the final touches. They had formed a special bond. Rossi saw Raphael as a son, I believe. The son he never had. Caterina stood, pulled a photo album from a shelf, and opened it to a specific page. There was Raphael, young, smiling, with the same intense gaze Helena had, standing beside a blonde man with hauntingly empty eyes. Dimitri. My brother and Raphael became friends that summer, Caterina continued. Raphael had something Dimitri needed: peace, purpose. He talked about music in a way that touched my brother deeply. For the first time in years, I saw Dimitri genuinely happy. She turned the page, showing more photos. Raphael and Dimitri playing together, laughing in cafes, walking through the cobbled streets of Cremona. Raphael saved my brother, Caterina said, her voice trembling. For 3 months, Dimitri was the person we remembered before the illness consumed him. And then, her voice faltered. She closed her eyes. Dimitri died. Yuki said softly. Car accident. September 2006. It wasn't an accident, Caterina said sharply, opening her eyes, now filled with tears. It was suicide. Dimitri drove deliberately into a tree. He left a letter. He said he couldn't live with the pain anymore, that music wasn't enough to save him, that he was sorry. The room fell silent. Raphael was devastated, Caterina continued. He blamed himself. He thought he had failed Dimitri. Rossi was shattered too. He had poured months of work and love into that violin. Now Dimitri was gone, and the violin seemed cursed. But Rossi gave it to my father, Helena said. Yes, Caterina nodded. 2 months after the funeral, Rossi called Raphael and said the Angelo Caduto needed to live. That keeping it locked away would mean letting Dimitri die again. He said Raphael was the only one who could honor Dimitri's memory by playing it. She looked straight at Helena. Your father played the Angelo Caduto for the first time at Dimitri's memorial concert. It was December 2006 in Cremona. I was there, and Helena. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Raphael didn't just play notes. He played Dimitri's soul. The joy, the pain, the wasted brilliance, everything. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the hall. Tears streamed down Helena's face. Raphael returned to Brazil soon after, Caterina continued. We kept in touch for a while. Letters, occasional emails. He told me about you, Helena. How he was raising a baby alone after your mother died. How he was struggling to balance fatherhood and his career. And then... The letters stopped, Yuki finished. Yes, Caterina said. 2010. The last letter I received was in March. He said he was facing difficulties. That people were trying to destroy his career. That doors were closing. But he wouldn't give up. He said he had you to care for, and that was all that mattered. Eduardo was pale. His hands trembled slightly. This was the undeniable confirmation of the damage he had caused. I tried to reach out after that, Caterina said. Emails bounced back. The phone was disconnected. It was as if Raphael had simply disappeared from the world. He did disappear, Helena whispered. To the streets, to survival. For me. Caterina knelt in front of Helena, taking her hands in hers. Your father was one of the noblest men I've ever met. He sacrificed everything, his career, his future, his comfort, for you. And now here you are, in Moscow, about to compete in the same competition Dimitri never got to enter, with the same violin that was made for my brother. She squeezed Helena's hands. This isn't a coincidence, child. It's destiny. The circle closing. You will play not just for yourself or for your father, but for all of us. For Dimitri, for Rossi, for every soul who loved music but never got the chance to let the world hear it. We spent another 2 hours at Caterina's apartment. She showed more photos, told more stories about Raphael and Dimitri. There was a richness there, a history none of us had fully known. When we finally left, it was past midnight. A thin layer of snow covered the streets. Helena was quiet, processing everything she'd learned. "Are you okay?" I asked gently as we walked back to the hotel. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's a lot. Knowing my father had this whole story, these connections, and that he gave it all up. For me." "He didn't give up," Yuki corrected. "He chose. There's a difference. Giving up is surrender. Choosing is power." "But he could have had so much," Helena insisted, frustration in her voice. "An international career, recognition, financial security. Instead, he died in a rundown room, poor, sick, forgotten." Eduardo stopped walking. He turned to Helena with an intense expression. "Helena, can I ask you something? If you had to choose between your musical career and the person you love most in the world, what would you choose?" Helena was silent, genuinely thinking. I don't know. Your father knew?" Eduardo said softly. "He chose you. Every day, every hard decision, every sacrifice, he chose you. And you know what? I don't think he regretted it. Not for a second. Because when you truly love someone, it's not a sacrifice. It's love." Tears glistened in Helena's eyes. "How do you know?" "Because," Eduardo said, his voice thick with emotion. "These past 18 months watching you grow, hearing you play, witnessing your journey, I finally understood what Raphael always knew. That success isn't measured by money or fame. It's measured by the impact you have on others. And Helena, you've impacted me more deeply than any deal I've ever made, any building I've ever built." He knelt in the snow, meeting her eyes. "You made me want to be better. You showed me that redemption is possible, that it's never too late to fix your mistakes. Your father must have felt that every day with you, that sense of being part of something bigger than himself." Helena hugged Eduardo right there in the snowy Moscow street, and they cried together. Yuki placed a hand on both their shoulders. And I simply documented the moment, knowing I was witnessing something profoundly sacred. But even in that moment of deep emotional connection, my mind couldn't stop turning, because there was something Katerina said that I couldn't shake. It's not a coincidence. It's destiny. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. All of it. Raphael meeting Rossi, receiving the Angelo Caduto, returning to Brazil, having Helena, teaching her under impossible circumstances, Eduardo rediscovering her. None of it was random. It was a story that had begun long before any of us realized, and it was about to reach its climax, because in just 3 days, Helena would step onto the stage of the Tchaikovsky Conservatory. She would play before the greatest musicians, critics, and conductors in the world, with the violin that was made for a dead genius, carrying the legacy of a father who sacrificed everything, representing all those who never had the chance to be heard. The pressure was immense, impossible even. But as I watched Helena that night, covered in snow, eyes red from crying, yet with that unmistakable spark of determination, I knew she was ready. Not necessarily ready to win, but ready to honor. And sometimes that's far more important. The Tchaikovsky Conservatory was even more imposing than the photographs suggested. We arrived on the morning of the first day of the competition, 3 days before Helena's performance, so she could get familiar with the space. The building was a neoclassical masterpiece with grand white columns and a bronze statue of Tchaikovsky guarding the entrance. History lived in every stone of that place. Generations of musical geniuses had walked through those doors. And now, Helena would too. Inside, the grand concert hall took our breath away. 1,500 seats arranged in elegant tiers, balconies ornamented with golden details, a ceiling painted with mythological scenes, and at the center of it all, the stage. A polished wooden stage that had seen some of the greatest musicians in history. Helena stopped at the entrance, just staring. Her breathing was quick. "It's big," she whispered. "It is," Yuki agreed, standing beside her. "But you don't play for the space. You play for people. And in the end, people are just people, no matter where they're sitting. Easy for you to say, Helena murmured. Yuki smiled. I played on this stage in 1982. I was 22. I was so terrified I threw up backstage 15 minutes before walking out. But do you know what I realized when I finally stepped onto that stage? What? That the fear doesn't matter. You walk out, pick up the violin, and the rest is just you and the music. Everything else disappears. We spent the day watching other competitors. There were 20 violinists in total from 15 different countries. Each had their strengths, their unique style, their story. A young Japanese boy with flawless robotic technique. A 17-year-old Russian girl who played with wild passion. A French performer whose interpretation was intellectual and precise. They were all exceptional. Any one of them could win. Helena watched each performance with intense focus, absorbing, learning. But I could see the anxiety growing inside her with each passing day. With every brilliant violinist who took the stage, she seemed to shrink a little more. They're so good, she told me the night before her performance. We were in her room and she couldn't stay still. That boy from China today, did you see his finger speed? And the girl from Germany had such mature musicality. Helena, I interrupted gently. You don't have to be like them. You have to be you. What if I'm not good enough? It was the same question, again and again, and I never had an answer that fully satisfied her. Then you're not, I said honestly. But you'll walk off that stage knowing you gave it your best, that you honored your father, that you honored yourself. And that's what matters. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. That night, neither of us slept much. The day had come. Helena was 18th to perform, almost at the end of the competition. Eduardo speculated that this was a deliberate strategy by the organizers to place the most controversial contestant, the Cinderella story, near the end to keep the audience engaged. The morning was torture. Helena tried to practice, but her fingers were stiff with nerves. She tried to eat, but could barely swallow. Yuki made her do breathing exercises, meditation, visualization. Nothing seemed to help completely. At 4 p.m. we got the notification. Helena was expected backstage in 1 hour. The drive to the conservatory was silent. Helena held the Angelo Caduto violin case on her lap like it was a baby. Her eyes were fixed on the window, but I knew she wasn't seeing anything. She was deep inside her mind, fighting invisible battles. We arrived backstage. It was a maze of narrow hallways, warm-up rooms, and palpable tension. Other musicians waited for their turn, some practicing scales frantically, others sitting in silent meditation. A middle-aged organizer with a clipboard and a stern expression checked Helena's documents and directed her to a warm-up room. 30 minutes, she said in broken English. Then you wait here. She pointed to an area with chairs where other musicians were seated. When we call, you go. Helena nodded, unable to speak. In the warm-up room, she took the Angelo Caduto out of its case. Her hands trembled so much she almost dropped the bow. Yuki gripped her shoulders firmly. Look at me, Yuki ordered. Breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. That's it. Again. Helena obeyed, her breathing gradually slowing down. Now listen carefully, Yuki said, her voice taking on that quality she used when saying something truly important. You've spent 18 months preparing for this moment. 18 months of pain, sweat, tears, sacrifice. Your body knows what to do. Your mind knows what to do. You need to trust it. But what if? There is no what if, Yuki cut in. There's only now. There's only you, the violin, and the music. When you step on that stage, I want you to forget the judges, the audience, the expectations. Play for your father. Play for Dmitri. Play for Rossi. Play for that 12-year-old girl hungry standing in front of the municipal theater, who had the courage to ask, "Can I play for a piece of food?" That girl deserves this moment. Give it to her. Tears streamed down Helena's face, but she nodded. Eduardo entered the room at that moment holding a bottle of water. He saw Helena's state and immediately knelt in front of her. "I need to tell you something," he said softly. "No matter what happens today, you win, you lose, you place 10th, nothing changes between us. You have a home, you have a family, you have a future. That's already guaranteed. So go out there and play without the weight. Play with freedom, because you've already won. Just by being here, you've already won." Helena hugged Eduardo, and he held her for a long moment. That's when the organizer opened the door. "5 minutes," she announced. The world seemed to speed up and slow down all at once. We followed Helena through the hallways to the waiting area. She held the violin. I carried my camera. I'd received special permission to film backstage. Eduardo and Yuki walked silently beside her. In the waiting area, we could hear the previous competitor finishing their piece. There was polite applause, but not enthusiastic. Clearly, it hadn't gone well. The organizer gestured to Helena. "Now." Helena stood up. Her legs were visibly shaking. Yuki held her arm. "One last thing. When you're up there, terrified, with 1,500 pairs of eyes on you, remember this. No one alive can play the Angelo Caduto the way you can. It's yours, your gift, your legacy, your voice. No one can take that from you." Helena took one last deep breath, adjusted her elegant black dress and walked toward the stage. We rushed to the side area where we could watch, a small backstage corner with partial view of the stage and audience. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Helena walked to the center of the stage. The spotlight hit her, and for a moment she looked so small. A 13-year-old girl, alone on a massive stage, before more than 1,000 people, including some of the greatest names in classical music. The silence in the hall was absolute. Helena positioned the violin, adjusted her posture exactly as Yuki had taught her 1,000 times. She placed the bow on the strings, closed her eyes, and then something unexpected happened. Before she started playing, Helena opened her eyes and spoke. Her voice, amplified by the stage microphones, echoed through the hall. This violin was made by Benedetto Rossi in 1967 for the violinist Dmitri Volkov. Dmitri died before he could play it. My father, Rafael Mendez, received this instrument as a gift from Rossi and taught me everything I know about music. He died 3 years ago, poor and forgotten. Today, I play for both of them. For all those whose voices were silenced too soon. There was a murmur in the audience. Some of the judges leaned forward, interest rekindled in their faces. And then Helena began. The piece was Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto in D major, Yuki's strategic choice, since it was the concerto that gave the competition its name. It was a statement. I didn't come here to play it safe. I came to conquer. The opening bars were delicate, almost fragile. Helena played with her eyes closed, and I could see every muscle in her body engaged with the music. It wasn't just her fingers or the bow. It was everything. Her breathing, her posture, the subtle way she moved with the melody. And then the music exploded. The first movement of Tchaikovsky's concerto is brutally technical. Octave jumps, fast double stops, passages that demand superhuman precision. Helena attacked those passages with a ferocity that made several people in the audience audibly gasp. But it wasn't just technique. There was soul. Every note told a story. The hunger, the cold, the nights sleeping on the streets, her father's death, the despair, but also hope, love, music as salvation. All of it was there, encoded in the vibrations of that $2 million violin. I looked at the audience. People were completely still, captivated. Some had tears streaming down their faces. I saw one of the judges, a German conductor known for his severity, discreetly wipe his eyes. The second movement was slower, melancholic. Helena played it with a delicacy that seemed almost impossible. The sound emerging from the Angelo Caduto was ethereal, otherworldly. It felt as if Rossi himself was there, his soul singing through the wood he had shaped 50 years ago. And then came the third movement, fast, virtuosic, technically insane. This was where many violinists failed. The speed required, combined with precision, was nearly impossible to sustain for several minutes. But Helena seemed to have transcended physical limits. Her fingers flew up and down the violin's neck so fast they were almost a blur. The bow danced across the strings, creating textures that ranged from whispers to screams. And through it all, there was a clear narrative. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling the story of her life, of every life she'd touched, of her father, of Dmitri, of Rossi, of all the forgotten and silenced artists. When she reached the final cadenza, that moment where the soloist plays alone, showcasing pure virtuosity, something extraordinary happened. Helena opened her eyes, and she smiled, not a nervous or forced smile, but a smile of pure, absolute joy, as if she had finally understood something fundamental about herself, about music, about life. And then she played the cadenza with breathtaking freedom. There was no more fear, no more doubt. There was only a girl and her violin, speaking a language that transcended words. When the final note echoed through the hall, a long, sustained note that seemed to float in the air for eternity, there was a moment of absolute silence. 2 seconds, 3, 4, and then the hall erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was shouting. People immediately stood, clapping so hard it hurt. "Brava, brava, brava," echoed from every corner. I saw professional musicians, people who had seen and heard everything, with tears streaming freely. The judges were on their feet. All of them. Some clapping, others simply watching Helena with expressions of pure awe. And in the middle of it all, Helena stood on stage, holding the Angelo Caduto, looking at the audience with complete disbelief, as if she couldn't believe it was really happening. Eduardo was sobbing next to me. "She did it," he repeated. "She really did it." Yuki was smiling at a huge, proud, genuine smile. "I knew it," she murmured. "From the very first day, I knew she was special." The applause went on for a full 5 minutes. Helena bowed once, twice, 3 times, but the audience wouldn't stop. Finally, she walked off stage, and the moment she reached the wings, her legs gave out. Eduardo caught her before she fell. "You were perfect," he said. "Absolutely perfect." "I don't remember," Helena said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I literally don't remember playing half of it. It was like someone else took over." "It wasn't someone else," Yuki said gently. "It was you. The truest version of you. The person you've always been but were afraid to show." The following days were a surreal blur. Helena became the sensation of the competition. Her performance was the most talked about, the most shared, the most debated. Amateur videos recorded by audience members started circulating online and went instantly viral. "Homeless girl moves Moscow to tears." The performance that made the world stop. Helena Mendez, the name you need to know. But Helena barely paid attention to any of it. She was in a strange state, exhausted, relieved, but also strangely empty, as if she had poured everything she had into that performance and now nothing was left. "It's normal," Yuki assured me. "Performances at that level take everything out of you. She needs time to recharge." The award ceremony would be in 3 days. Until then, we had to wait. And waiting was the hardest part, because now that Helena had done her part, now that she had left everything on that stage, her fate was completely out of her hands. All we could do was wait, and hope, and trust that 18 months of work, sacrifice, and love would be enough. The 3 days of waiting were the longest of our lives. Helena swung between euphoria and panic. One moment she was smiling, remembering the feeling of being on stage. The next, she was convinced she had messed everything up, that the judges would hate her, that she'd be humiliated publicly. "I heard a Japanese musician playing in the hallway yesterday," she said on the morning of the second day as we had breakfast at the hotel. "He was technically perfect, 0 mistakes, and I know I made at least 3 little slips in the cadenza. Music isn't about technical perfection. Yuki replied for the 1,000th time. It's about communication, about making people feel something. But what if the judges only care about technique? Then you won't win, Eduardo said with his usual blunt honesty. And that's okay, because what you did on that stage has already changed your life. It's already opened doors that will never close again. Winning the competition would be amazing, but not winning doesn't mean you failed. Helena pushed her food around without actually eating. I wanted so badly to honor my father, you know? To prove that all his sacrifices were worth it. You already have, I said gently. Everyone in that room saw it. They felt it. Your father would be proud, I'm absolutely sure of it. But the words, however sincere, didn't seem to penetrate the anxiety that consumed Helena. On the afternoon of the second day, Katerina Volkov came to visit us at the hotel. She carried an old wooden box tied with a faded ribbon. For Helena, she announced, placing the box on the table. Something that belonged to Dmitri. I think you should have it. Helena opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were old, yellowed sheet music pages covered in handwritten notes in the margins. They were Dmitri Volkov's personal scores, including his own marked version of the Tchaikovsky concerto. He wrote notes everywhere, Katerina explained, pointing to the scribbles. Instructions for himself, emotional reminders, alternative interpretations. This was how Dmitri spoke to music, through words written in the margins. Helena leafed through the pages with reverence, reading the notes. Here, think of Mom, the way she sang while cooking. Darker, like a storm approaching. Remember that beauty can exist even in pain. They were intimate, vulnerable thoughts, a window into the mind of a tormented genius. Why are you giving this to me? Helena asked, eyes brimming with tears. Katerina gave a sad smile. Because when I heard you play, I saw my brother. Not just technically, but spiritually. You understand music the same way he did, as a language of emotion, not just notes. These scores belong with someone who understands them. And that person is you. Helena hugged the scores to her chest. Thank you. I'll take care of them like they're sacred. They are, Katerina simply replied. Finally, the day of the awards ceremony arrived. The conservatory was even more crowded than during the competition days. The international press had arrived in force, reporters from dozens of countries, all wanting to cover the result. Helena's story had gone global, and now the whole world was watching. Backstage before the ceremony began, we ran into Viktor Petrov, the Russian maestro who had attended Helena's recital months earlier in São Paulo. I wanted you to know, he said to Helena, that your performance was the best I've seen in 10 years of this competition, maybe in 20. Regardless of today's outcome, you have a guaranteed future in this world. Helena could barely respond, too overwhelmed with emotion. And, Victor continued, I'd like to make you an offer. The St. Petersburg Philharmonic has an opening for a guest soloist in the spring season. If you're interested, the spot is yours. Helena's eyes widened. A performance with one of the most prestigious orchestras in the world. This was the kind of opportunity most musicians only dream about. I accept, she said, her voice trembling. It would be an honor. Victor smiled. Great. My assistant will contact you. He gave a small bow and walked away. Eduardo was beaming. Did you hear that? No matter what happens tonight, you already have an international performance secured. But Helena could barely process it. Her eyes were fixed on the door that led to the main stage, where the results would soon be announced. At exactly 8 p.m., the lights went out. A spotlight illuminated the stage where an elegant podium stood. The jury president, a retired Russian violinist with completely white hair, walked up to the microphone. All 20 competitors sat in the front rows. Helena was in seat 18, between the French competitor and the Russian girl. Her hands were clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. Good evening, the president began in Russian with simultaneous translation playing through the headsets we had been given. This has been one of the most extraordinary years in the history of the Tchaikovsky competition. The level of talent we witnessed was truly exceptional. He began to talk about the competition's history, past winners, the importance of classical music. It was all the necessary rhetoric, but everyone in the room just wanted to hear the results. "We will begin by announcing the honorable mentions," he finally said. 3 names were called, none of them Helena. Each musician went up, received a certificate, and polite applause followed. "Now, 3rd place," the president announced. There was a dramatic pause. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear. From South Korea, Kim Minjun. A young man stood up, clearly surprised and emotional. More applause. "2nd place," the president continued. Another pause. Helena was so tense she looked like she might break. From Russia, Anastasia Petrova, the Russian girl, the one who had played with wild passion, stood up with tears in her eyes. She had been one of the favorites. 2nd place was excellent, but everyone knew she wanted 1st. And now, only one position remained. 1st place. The president looked at the envelope in his hands. He opened it slowly, dramatically slow. He read the contents. And then he smiled. "The 1st place in this year's International Tchaikovsky Violin Competition," he said, "is a decision the jury reached unanimously, something extremely rare. All 9 judges agreed without hesitation that one competitor stood out not only technically, but artistically, musically, spiritually." He paused, looking directly at where Helena was seated. From Brazil, Helena Mendes. For a moment there was absolute silence. And then the room exploded. Helena didn't move. She was frozen in her chair, wide-eyed as if she couldn't process what she had just heard. Eduardo had to gently push her to stand. "You won," he whispered. "Helena, you won." Only then did it sink in. Helena began to cry, huge, uncontrollable sobs. Yuki hugged her quickly, then pushed her toward the stage. Helena climbed the steps on trembling legs. The president greeted her with a warm embrace, then placed a heavy gold medal around her neck. Camera flashes went off from every direction. "Would you like to say a few words?" the president asked, offering the microphone. Helena looked at the audience, 1,500 people standing, clapping, cheering. She looked at where we were sitting, Eduardo crying openly, Yuki smiling proudly, Katerina wiping her eyes, me holding my camera with trembling hands. She took the microphone, breathed deeply, and when she spoke, her voice echoed clear and strong through the sound system. "I wasn't on the streets 18 months ago. I was alone, hungry, scared. I thought I was worthless, that the world would be the same if I disappeared." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "My father taught me that music is truth, that when you play with honesty, people listen, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. He sacrificed everything to teach me that. His career, his comfort, his life. And then a man who had made terrible mistakes in the past, gave me a second chance, gave me hope, gave me a future." She looked directly at Eduardo. "This prize isn't mine. It belongs to my father, Rafael Mendes, who never had the chance to show his talent to the world. It belongs to Dmitry Volkov, who died too young. It belongs to Benedetto Rossi, who crafted this violin with love. It belongs to all the people who have gifts to share but are never given a chance. This prize is to say, we see you, we hear you, your voices matter." The applause that followed was deafening. But Helena wasn't done. "And I want to say something to anyone watching this who's in a dark place right now, who thinks they have no value, who feels invisible. I see you, and I promise, if you have something to say, if you have a gift to share, don't give up. Because the world needs to hear your voice. No matter where you come from, no matter what you've been through, your story isn't over. There's still music to be made." When Helena left the stage, she was engulfed in hugs. Eduardo held her for a long moment, whispering, "I'm sorry," over and over, asking forgiveness from Raphael's ghost through his daughter. Yuki was smiling and crying simultaneously. "I knew it," she kept repeating. "From the very first day." Katerina hugged Helena tightly. "Dmitry would have loved you," she whispered. "And your father. Your father is so proud right now." The night turned into a celebration. There was a formal reception where Helena was introduced to dozens of important people: conductors, conservatory directors, festival organizers. Everyone wanted to meet her, work with her, bring her to their institutions. But amid all the excitement, Helena pulled me aside. "Can I ask you a favor?" she asked. "Anything. You documented all of this, the whole journey. I want you to tell the story, the real story, not the sanitized version for the media, the truth, the pain, the mistakes, the fear, all of it." "Why?" I asked. "Because," she said, looking at the crowd of important people laughing and drinking champagne, "someone somewhere needs to know this is possible, that you can start from nothing and get somewhere, that mistakes can be corrected, that it's never too late for redemption, that music, art, can save lives." She looked at me with those eyes that had seen far more than any 13-year-old ever should. "Promise you'll tell the real story?" "I promise," I replied, "and that's why I'm here now, writing these words, fulfilling that promise." 3 months later, we were back in Brazil, but not at the apartment in Higienópolis. This time, we went to a place Helena had asked to visit since we returned, the cemetery where Raphael was buried. It was a simple cemetery in the east zone of São Paulo. Modest graves, poorly kept grass, heavy silence. Raphael was buried in a pauper's section, no elaborate tombstone, just a simple wooden cross with his name scribbled on it. Helena knelt before the grave. She had brought Angelo Caduto with her. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "Sorry it took me so long to come. I was busy." She smiled through tears. "I won, Dad, the Tchaikovsky competition. First place. They said I was the best they'd seen in years. And now, so much is happening. I'll play in St. Petersburg in the spring. There's a recording contract being negotiated. Conservatories want to offer me scholarships." She gently touched the earth over the grave. "But none of this would matter if you hadn't taught me, if you hadn't sacrificed everything for me. You gave up your dreams so I could have mine. And I swear, Dad, I swear I'll make it worth it. I'll play in a way that honors you, that keeps you alive. Because as long as I play, you're not forgotten." She picked up the violin and began to play right there in the cemetery. She chose Bach's Chaconne, the same piece she had played that first night in front of the municipal theater. But now it was different, more mature, deeper, carrying all the experiences of the past 18 months. People visiting other graves stopped to listen. An old man began to cry. A young woman recorded a video on her phone. And when Helena finished, when the last note floated in the cemetery's silent air, she whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for everything. I love you." Eduardo, who had been standing a few meters away to give Helena privacy, approached. He looked at Raphael's grave for a long moment. Then, slowly, he knelt. "Raphael," he said, his voice breaking, "I made a terrible mistake. I despised you, belittled you, used my power to destroy something beautiful, and I lived 15 years with that guilt." He wiped his eyes. "But your daughter, your extraordinary daughter, gave me something I didn't deserve. Forgiveness, a chance to make things right. And I swear, for the rest of my life, I'll do everything I can to ensure your legacy lives on, that your sacrifice wasn't in vain, that the world knows Rafael Mendes was one of the greats, and that he created something even greater." Helena placed her hand on Eduardo's shoulder. "He would forgive you," she said softly. "He taught me that everyone deserves a second chance, that redemption is always possible." Eduardo looked at her. "How did you get so wise, so young?" "I had a good teacher," Helena smiled. That afternoon, Eduardo signed papers he had been preparing. Papers that made official what was already true in their hearts. He was legally adopting Helena. She would be Helena Mendes Vasconcelos. She would have family, stability, a last name with weight. But more important than all of that, she would have love. A year later, I was at the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg, covering Helena's performance with the Philharmonic. The hall was completely full. Over 1,800 people. The international press was there in force. It was one of the most anticipated musical events of the year. But this time Helena wasn't nervous. She walked onto the stage with quiet confidence, holding Angelo Caduto as an extension of herself. And when she began to play, it was as if the entire world breathed with her. During the intermission, I found Katerina Volkov in the lobby. She was smiling. Dmitri would have loved to see this, she said. Raphael too. They all live through her now. It's beautiful. It is, I agreed. You know, Katerina continued, there's a Russian saying, Muzika это память сердца. Music is the memory of the heart. Helena is living proof of that. She carries the memory of all those who loved her, believed in her, sacrificed for her. And through music, she keeps them alive. We returned to our seats as the second half began. And as I watched Helena play, not a frightened girl anymore, but a mature, confident, brilliant artist, I realized something fundamental. This wasn't just a story about talent being discovered. It wasn't just about a girl going from the streets to international stages. It was about something much greater. It was about how love persists beyond death, how sacrifice builds legacies, how mistakes can be corrected, not by erasing the past, but by building a better future. How art, true art, has the power to heal, transform, redeem. Rafael Mendez never had his chance, but through Helena, his voice was finally heard. And it was a voice that resonated across continents, across generations, through time itself. Today, 5 years after that night in front of the Municipal Theater, Helena Mendez Vasconcelos is one of the most respected names in the classical music world. She has recorded 3 critically acclaimed albums. She has played in the most prestigious halls: Carnegie Hall, Royal Albert Hall, Musikverein. She has won multiple international awards, but what she's most proud of isn't the awards or recognition. It's the foundation she created with Eduardo, the Rafael Mendez Institute for Young Musicians, an organization that identifies and supports talented children from underprivileged communities, giving them the opportunities Rafael never had. So far, the foundation has helped over 200 children. Some are starting their own musical careers. Others have simply found in music a way to process trauma, express emotion, and dream of better futures. And every time Helena plays, on any stage in any country, she dedicates the performance to her father. For Rafael, she says before starting, who taught me that music is truth? And then she plays, and the world listens. And for a few magical minutes, Rafael Mendez lives again, not forgotten, not silenced, but singing through the daughter he loved more than life itself. This story is dedicated to all those who have gifts to share, but were never given the chance. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Don't give up. The world needs to hear what you have to say. Comment where you're watching this from and tag someone who needs to hear this message. Let's make this story reach every corner of the world. And so ends the journey of Helena Mendez, a girl who began on the streets playing for food and became one of the greatest violinists of her generation. A story of talent, sacrifice, redemption, and the transformative power of music. A story true in spirit, even if fictional in detail, because somewhere, right now, there's a Helena waiting to be discovered, and this story is for her.